Hey, welcome to the Branches Worldwide podcast. We're excited to have you join us today. And if this is your first episode, here's what you got to know. You got to know that every episode on the Branches Worldwide podcast, we talk to high impact entrepreneurs who are making an incredible impact in their community. Now, the reality is we always talk about three things. We talk about number one, their faith, number two, their business, and number three, we talk about how they're combining their faith and their business together to bless their communities. And that's why we're talking today to Ryan Vandendyck. Ryan is an incredible entrepreneur from Vancouver, Canada, and he's doing incredible work through his company, Eden Industries. He founded it in May 2010, and it has 35 employees right now, and it's still growing. Not only does Ryan teach apologetics at his church, not only is he a husband and a father, and he's got an incredible family, but he's also worked with some of the greatest video game creators on the planet. He's worked with Miyamoto-san. That's the guy. If you're not familiar with gaming, you've got to know this is the guy who founded or who created Donkey Kong, who created Mario, who created Legend of Zelda. And Ryan has worked on some incredible games. He's worked with Nintendo. He's worked on Mario Strikers and Luigi's Mansion. He has collaborated with some of the best video game creators on the planet. And right now he's working on some pretty high profile games like Call of Duty and Hogwarts Legacy. He's doing some amazing things. And that's why we're really excited to have him on the podcast. And that's why we're very excited to have him as part of the Branches Worldwide community. Ryan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and jump into it a little bit. I know that we had some conversation earlier, and you've been a part of Branches Worldwide for a long time now. And one of the things I think that's most interesting about you is the idea of how you started Eden Industries. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the company itself, and then tell us how you started it?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I do video game development. So Eden Industries is a company I founded to create video games primarily for PC and console platforms. And so the story of how it began really goes back to like the earliest days of my life. So even when I was 2 years old, I was playing video games. Back then it was pretty basic, I guess, right? Think back to the mid to late 80s. But I absolutely loved it, and then my mom would buy me. Yeah. So, my mom would buy me, video games. And I loved it so much. I would just devour them. I remember vividly, I got chicken pox. I just played video games straight for like a whole week. And then it got to the point where, I was beating them so fast that my mom said, Ryan, you're so good at playing games. Why don't you make games? And I thought, that is a good idea, Mom. And so this was at about 8 years old. And I was like, that's it. That's what I'm going to do. So 8 years old, I was like, that's the trajectory. So, all through school, that was my whole goal, my whole aim. I went to university to study mathematics and computer programming to be a programmer for games. Worked in the games industry for a number of years and decided without much thought, really, just like I'm going to just make my own company and make my own games. And that's how Eden Industries was kind of born.
That's wild. So if you would have gone back to high school and looked at your high school yearbook and it would have said, who's most likely to make video games, people would have known that that's what you wanted to do. You were very clear about it from the get-go.
Oh, yeah. That was very, very obvious. And people thought it was sort of bizarre. Like, because like, it's not really like cool in like high school to be like, yeah, I'm going to go work with Nintendo. But that was my thing. That's what I wanted to do. And yeah.
Good for you. That's excellent clarity. Now, speaking of clarity, one of the things I think that's most impressive about you is that your faith is really integrated in everything that you do. And we talk about this a lot in Branches Worldwide, that there isn't really two camps, right? Where you sort of, do what you want to do on Monday through Saturday. And then on Sunday, hey, you're a Christian. And then you sort of show up to work again. It's integrated in literally everything. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. But why don't you talk right now about when you started to take your faith seriously? Like, when did it start to integrate? And we'll talk about your work later, but when did it become personal for you?
Yeah, so I really have to put a lot of credit to my mom. As I mentioned, she was the one who said like, "Hey, Ryan, maybe you should make video games," and so she was a very formative part of my life. And then so when I was graduating high school for like a graduation present, my mom got me a Bible, and I thought this was a very dumb gift because I already had a Bible. Why would I need another Bible, right? But she didn't put my name on it. She didn't, the whole thing, right? So I was like, okay, whatever. So then I went to university, and so I'm here in Vancouver. and then but I went to University of Waterloo out in Ontario, so like 5,000 kilometers, to the east. So
Mm,
I was like, nowhere near anyone I knew, right? No family, no friends,
mm,
nothing, totally alone. And
mm.
then, so I'm sitting in my dorm room at university, and for the first 3 weeks, my whole dorm building, like 13 floors of this building had no internet. It was knocked out, and for 3 weeks couldn't fix it. And so,
3 weeks.
after I
Jeez.
yeah, 3 weeks there was no internet for the whole building. And so if we need internet for whatever, we have to go on campus. Um, and so I didn't know anybody, or I couldn't, um, talk online with my friends. If I was at my house, right, I had to go, like, say, go to the library to write an email or whatever. Like, this is before Facebook and everything too, right? So there wasn't as much of that kind of stuff. So I went to class, came home, maybe did some homework, but the first 3 weeks you don't have a ton of homework, right? And I had nothing to
Mm,
do, right? Because I didn't know anybody. Nothing worked in my dorm in terms of the internet. So I would just read my Bible that my mom gave me. And so I was just kind of reading it, and I just so happened to read.
mm,
I was reading about King David, sort of in First and Second Samuel and the Psalms there, and how he was described as a man after God's own heart. And that really struck
mm,
me as like, okay,
mm,
that is how I want people to remember me. As like, yeah, sure, Ryan, he made video games, whatever, but this guy was a man after God's own heart. And so that was when
mm,
I really, I grew up, Christian and, believing and everything, but this was the moment where, like, it really became personal for me.
mm. That's good. That's really good. Dig into that a little bit. So, I mean, most people who've been around church for a long time are aware that one of the monikers on David is, hey, he was after God's own heart, right? Mentioned a couple different times in scripture. But why was that more personal for you than really anything else? Like, not David and Goliath, not da 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 da, but why after God's own heart? Why did that phrase stick with you?
Yeah, I think two reasons. I think one is the the contrast, right? And I think you see this through the Bible a lot, right? It's like the big flashy stuff. That's not really what God is after, right? It's the heart. It's
Mm,
like the little things, you know what I mean? So sure, he was a
mm,
king. Sure, he's a giant slayer. Sure, all these other things. That's not the point.
mm,
The point is
mm,
he was a man after God's own heart, right? Like, that was what
yeah,
was really crucial, Um, so that really struck me. And then the other thing too was, like, this was a time when I was imagining what is going to be the future for me, right? So I'm a first year university student. I have big dreams of making video games and that. So it was, paramount on my mind, like, what kind of person am I going to be? I'm on my own now. Like,
wow.
it's time for me to, grow up and
Oh,
be a man, kind of thing, whatever. So I need to decide, what kind of
mhm,
person am I going to be? And so this was a very
mm,
powerful, revelation, in a sense of, like, oh, right, that is the kind of person that I want to be. Even though I have all these
wow.
grand ideas of business and my work and career, sure, sure, sure. But this is, like, at the crux of it, who I want to be.
That's strong. Wow. I mean, it feels like that's a moment that, you get that revelation. I like that phrase, that you can start to build your life around. You can start to orient your decision making around this idea of, this is who I want to be, that clarity of vision. Again, hey, I want to build video games and I want to be a man after God's own heart. That's incredible. I'm starting to sense a theme here of, like, clarity of vision in your life. That's incredible, Ryan. I love that.
Hmm.
It's good. Now, let's talk a little bit about the business itself. So, one of the things we love at Branches is the idea that we're working with these high impact entrepreneurs. Everybody within Branches has made it to a certain degree, right? We're not just struggling to, get this stuff off the ground. We've figured some things out. But in all of those moments, there's always a backstory of when you started, what those early years look like. Every entrepreneur has a story of, man, when they weren't sure it was all going to come together and they doubted themselves for months on end. Talk a little bit about those early years for you. What did it look like before you became, Ryan, who's the owner of Eden Industries? Talk
Sure.
about the Ryan who's the owner of Eden Industries. Like, what did
Yeah.
that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you say it like that too, right? Because, in the early days, yeah, I'd go to these, gaming conferences, right? And you have to wear a badge with your name on it. And when you register, you have to say, what's your title? Well, I mean, officially, my title is CEO. Like, according to the government paperwork, that is my title. So I put CEO. And so I was walking down the show floor, and I saw someone. He said, "Oh, CEO, you must be very important." And I was like, "No." um, so, it's one of those things.
It's
Yeah,
just a
sure, I was the
name. Just a
CEO of
name
a
like the
company no
owner.
one
Yeah.
cares about. Yeah. But
That's
yeah, so at the beginning, I mean, it was really hard because I guess I was sort of hedging my bets in a sense, which I think in retrospect is
mm,
smart but difficult, because I was working at a game company, and I loved my job. I was working on Luigi's Mansion, very beloved, kind of series for Nintendo. was awesome. I absolutely loved it. But I just wanted, I had ideas in my head. I wanted to get them out into the world. So evenings and weekends, I would work on my game. So I'd work a full time job, or sometimes more than full time, because in the games industry, overtime is common. So so work full time or more, 40 60 hours a week. Come home, spend literally all night, all weekend
Mm.
working, on my game. I'm that kind of person, not really, go out and do things, social kind of person, I guess. So I'd come home, work on my game. So it literally was all I did for, trying to think, 2.5 years basically, until I quit that company. And then released our game, first game, and basically that pattern continued for I don't know, the next 10 years or so, of like just working almost nonstop, like 80 to
Wow.
100 hours a week was common. Just trying to like keep everything together. Like we our first game did just enough that I could, okay, I guess convince my wife, like, that's not stupid. I maybe could do this. I don't need to go back, back to work. It was impressive enough, I guess, that it got us a contract for a bigger game, so that was great. But they didn't pay us a lot, and it was really ambitious. So again, working just like crazy. Only a couple
Mm.
hours of sleep every night. Just falling asleep on the floor of my house if I ever happened to lay down. Right, like I was just so in
Mm.
much in sleep debt. And I mean, yeah, like this went on for a decade. um, so thank God now, it's not quite so bad, or no, things are good. But yeah, for 10 years it was like, just there is no light at the end of the tunnel. This is just you work, work, work until you die. So it was hard.
Wow. That sounds horrible. I mean, and I'm sure there's a couple things I want to dig into it a little bit, but why don't you just give us some context here? So when you say you're working 100 hours a week, right? So that's 7 days out of the week. That's working 14-hour days. Like, what is it? What physically? What does it actually look like to work that many? And I'm sure maybe you took some days off, right? So then other days it's 16-hour days. Like,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about like yeah, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you didn't take any days
Yeah.
off. But talk about what a day literally looks like when you work that much. Like,
Mm.
how do you have a healthy marriage? How do you have a healthy body? Like, how does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, I don't recommend it. So basically, I was working from home, and so I would, roll out of bed at 7 in the morning, go to my desk, and just work until even my wife comes home from work at 5 or whatever. So I'm still working. She'll do whatever she has to do. She'll cook dinner. I'll eat a very hasty dinner with her. And then back to work. I work, 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 work. She goes to bed. I'm still working. Work, work, work till 2 or 3 in the morning. So I know it's basically, yeah. Wake up at 7, go to sleep at 3 in the morning, and do nothing but work all day
Mm,
long, every day
mm,
for 10 years, roughly.
mm.
I mean,
Wow.
there were small things. Right? I mean, like I did have, a kid in there or two. I mean, so like, okay, now I got to be a dad, and that obviously complicates things. Or it's like I'm up late. It'd be like, well, my daughter woke me up, so I'll just strap her to my chest in the baby carrier or whatever, and just go to my desk and work. Right? It's like I'm up anyway because I got to put her to bed. So it's like you find clever ways to incorporate it. And of course, I still
Mm,
went to church and did things like that. So it wasn't like I was a total hermit, but certainly, I mean, there was essentially, other than the fact that I was married, like almost no social life,
mm.
no hobbies, no nothing. Right? It was just basically, um, yeah,
Yeah.
almost
Yeah.
exclusively work, 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 work.
Yeah, and it's funny when it comes to that, entrepreneurs tend to have that same sense of focus, right? I think oftentimes when it comes to being a CEO or running a company, people just talk about it as if it's the sexiest thing in the world. But the reality is, like, under the covers or behind the curtain, it's like really, really difficult, and you have to really want it. So, one of the things I wonder in a season like that was, did you feel like you were being pushed? Like, did you feel like you had to do it? Like, gosh, you woke up every morning and you just felt, oh, this is horrible. I hate my life. I'm going to work till I die. Or did you feel like you were chasing something? Like, there's an opportunity in front of me, and man, I can't wait to get up and go after it. Maybe I'll catch it today. Like, what was your attitude?
Yeah, I think it was a little bit of both. I mean, fundamentally, I do love it, right? So if I didn't love it at its core, I mean, there's no way I would have done it, right? Like I could have
Yes.
gone, to get a job as a programmer anywhere, right? Like it's not like, oh my gosh, I have no options, and this is my lot in life, right? Like no, I could have just been like, nah, that's enough. I'm gonna go. I'll go work at a bank as a programmer and make a lot more money than I am now, right?
Mm,
Um,
mm,
but I did love it, and I'll still do love it. And so that,
mm,
you know, even amidst the hardship, really kept me going, because even though I'm working hard and tired and exhausted, still fundamentally I sit down at my desk and I enjoy what I do. So that was,
mm,
important, critical.
mm,
And then I think I
mm,
was definitely chasing, just, yeah, like, I have, again, a lot of dreams. I mean, that's why I quit my very good job I loved, right? To do it.
mm,
I had things I wanted to accomplish and believe in, and I felt like we had the right stuff to kind of do it. It's just, it's partly timing, and it's partly just, you know some factors outside of your control. You never really know, I guess. But I was definitely chasing that. um
mm,
at the same
mm,
time, you know I don't know if you can maybe say this is good, maybe it's bad, but we did have some of these contracts that had, expectations on what we had to do for the game and dates we had to hit. So on the one hand, it was bad because I had to work a ton, but I mean, you could maybe say on the one hand it's good because it really did push us to achieve some kind of tangible goal by a certain date.
mm,
So
mm,
it wasn't just like,
mm.
in limbo for 10 years trying to do something. Like, there were these sort of tangible things. So, that was pressure, and a lot of it. But I was also, yeah, chasing something bigger, I think, too.
That's really good. That's really good. And going back to what you said earlier about God putting a really clear dream in your mind and a really clear dream in your heart. I mean, that feeling like you're made to do something and then you get the opportunity to actually exercise that. For a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, it is not hard to put just all of their extra spare time into that, because what else am I going to do? Am I just going to watch more episodes of, How I Met Your Mother, or am I going to do the thing that God called me to do? And so I hear what you're saying there. There's that sense of, I want to do this. I feel like I'm chasing something, which is fantastic. Ryan, I'm wondering about your faith in that season. This isn't something that we've discussed, so I'm going to give it to you just kind of completely off the cuff. But talk about those 10 years of growth. How did you see God show up in your personal life, or how did you see him show up in your company? I mean, you're not necessarily hitting pay dirt immediately. It's almost like contract by contract by contract. Talk about how God really showed up in that moment for you.
Yeah. Well, it was a struggle. There were definitely ups and downs. But I do think that, looking back on it now, it is sort of a, I mean, when I say it like this, it's going to sound very, like, grandiose, but it's sort of like, God giving me manna from heaven on the way to the promised land. It's a funny way to phrase it,
Yeah.
but because, looking back, we always had just enough to get to, like, the next day, and it was very hard, um, and it was quite a struggle. But it was never, we were never so bad shape that I was going to quit. It was like, this is difficult, but I can keep going, barely. At the same time, yeah, it was never like, wow, everything is so amazing, and I'm gonna, life is, I'm on easy street now, I can retire. So it was just, yeah, it was really just day by day. And I remember one thing very, very vividly. So, we had just finished, our first kind of big contract that I mentioned. This is like 2015, and the 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 Canada Revenue Agency, kind of like the, what, IRS in the U.S., right? So the Canada Revenue Agency
Mhm.
sent me a letter and said, "Hey, you made a mistake on the tax you owe us for your employees."
Oh,
Um,
oh, oh.
and I was like, "Oh no!" And, like, sure enough, I did with it. I made a mistake, and so I owed them like $8,000 or something. Now, I mean, to a successful company, $8,000 is like an annoyance, but it's not that big a deal. For someone who has, like, nothing, I didn't know what I was gonna do. Like, right, like, I didn't have $8,000 sitting around. Like, I had saved up a lot of money, earlier in my career so that I could make games, but a lot of it was spent on,
Mm,
on building a company, right? You typically don't, that's how it works, right? You want to start a business, you spend money. So I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And I remember, I was at my community group at church at the time, and, praying about it and stuff. And then, lo and behold, out of nowhere, these guys email me and say, "Hey, we want to license the first game you'd made a couple years ago. We have a thing we want to do. We want to, sell it, whatever, and we'll pay you $15,000." And I was like, okay. um, which, is a lot more than I was. That game was still selling, a little bit here and there, but not much. Like, it was maybe, I don't know, a couple $100 a month kind of thing. But so they licensed it for a couple years for 15,000. And so, I mean, yeah, it was like, I didn't know what I was going to do, and then suddenly these guys just emailed me out of nowhere. We wanted to license the game. Um, And so,
That's
like I said,
fantastic. Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, looking back, it very much is like, um, I can sort of see what seems to be, God's, again, that manna from heaven. I think is the best analogy, right? It's like just your daily bread every day is a little bit. um, so yeah, and
I
there
love
were
that.
personal faith. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Well, all I was going to say is I love that analogy because what it does is it really describes God's process of sanctification. Like he really puts you through the paces where he gives you just food for the day. He probably could give you food for the week. Heck, he could give you food for the year if he wanted to, but he wants to develop your heart and your muscles in the process. And so he just gives it to you every day. And that 10 years of just struggle, like reminds me of David in the wilderness or Joseph, at prison or in Potiphar's house or Moses, wandering the wilderness. Like all that resembles God's work in our lives, repeatedly giving us hardship in order to develop us in our character. I love that, man. That's really good.
Yeah, well, one funny thing I'll mention too is, again, this is going into more the recent time where the business is doing well, but I would often pray, like, because of course it says in the Bible, right, that God will, fill your cup to overflowing, this sort of thing, And I was like, God, there's room in my cup, like, I'm not overflowing yet, like, what's happening? I'm running on empty here, And then these days, right, like, I honestly, I kind of get it now, because like the business is growing so fast, and I'm like, I am kind of
Mm.
overflowing, and it's sort of like a careful what you wish for kind of moment where I'm like, oh, whoops, like,
Uh,
um, oh yeah, this is also still hard. Like, it's not like, oh, now the business is doing well and everything is easy. It's like, oh yeah, this is still a struggle, and in some ways more of a struggle to make sure all my employees have
mm,
jobs and everything. But
mm,
yeah, so I guess
mm.
I'd say it took a decade, but yeah, I definitely feel sort of overflowing at the moment. So
I love it. That makes perfect sense. It's almost like there's this constant transition for entrepreneurs where you're struggling to become a success, really, sort of like a self-sustaining company, and then you're struggling to manage the success. Like both are equally difficult, and both just take a lot of acumen. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's good. Let's talk a little bit about God in your business, your faith in your business. Now, one of the things I love about you, Ryan, is that you are not just a casual Christian. That's one of the reasons why we wanted you to be part of the Branches Worldwide entrepreneurship community. We really thought that you could offer a lot to our team, and we thought we might be able to help you grow your business and grow your influence in your community. But ultimately, when we talked to you about your faith, it seemed deep and genuine. And clearly, you teach apologetics, so you're regularly thinking about Christ in a deep way, in a way that you can explain to other people. And then you integrate it into your business so well. Can you talk a little bit about what it looks like to really quantify the evidence of Christ in your business? What impact has your business made on the community, and how's Christ worked through you?
yeah, I think there's sort of two main things that I would say. um, the thing about video games, or even like tech more broadly, is it's not really known as an industry very receptive to God, to faith, right? Um, and so I sort of see this, there's two important pillars of sort of how I integrate faith in business, right? And one is to other game developers, um, because when I worked at other game companies, I wouldn't say it was a hostile environment. It was almost like I was a zoo animal. Like
Mm.
they just couldn't believe I was actually a Christian. It was like a curiosity. Like they're shocked that anyone would say they believed in
Hey,
God.
we got a live one here. It's a
So
real Christian. That's crazy.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like an alien landing, right? So I had a lot of really good conversations with my
Mm.
coworkers about God. I remember one, uh, looking back, I must have had some gumption, I guess, because so I was a co-op student, so I was like still doing my degree, and so I went to work for this game company as a student, um, and so just like the lowest of the ladder kind of thing, right? But I was a hard worker and I was so passionate, and so I think people kind of liked me. And so one day we were working late. We were, again, overtime was high, right? So working late. We're having dinner at the office, and we're talking about God or whatever. And so someone was mentioning something, and so I said, I believe in God. And so we had a big conversation in front of like a lot of coworkers. Again, I'm like, I don't know, what am I, 20 years old? Okay, fresh faced, still in school. But I was talking with them, and so we had a couple of conversations. And I gave him A Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis to read. He said he
Oh.
read the whole thing.
Mm.
And so that kind of thing, or like another couple examples. I remember um, these other kind of game developers here in Vancouver. You got to know them, and one time one of them was telling me that they had a conversation. I wasn't around. He said, I like that Ryan guy because he's a Christian, but like he's normal. right? Like they just hadn't ever met any normal, Christian. A lot of their interactions
Ah,
were,
that's good.
I guess, not pleasant ones, Or and then one last example is we get working late at the company. Um, and now I wasn't like aggressive about my faith, but I was just earnest. I say, so for
Mm,
example, every time we eat lunch or dinner, I would always pray before I eat,
mm,
like not
mm,
out loud, not a show, just
mm,
silently you pray.
mm.
But people saw it and they kind of understood. Oh, okay, he's a Christian. And so one night we're working late, and this guy said, "Hey, Ryan, if more Christians were like you, I would be a Christian,"
Ooh,
which is
that's a
a
strong
nice
statement. Yeah.
compliment, but of course, the wrong reason to be a Christian, right? But I think again, what it showed was like these people, my game development coworkers, just hadn't had good interactions with Christians,
Mm,
and just so the fact that they could meet a real one, right, like in the wild,
mm,
so to speak, was just a
mm.
important, meaningful thing for them.
Wow.
And so that I think is one half of the equation,
That's really
and then the
cool.
other half of how I think faith impacts business is um, just again, there's not really many Christians making games. It's you kind of think back, you a couple I don't know decades ago, right? In music and film, also like the church was kind of like, I don't know about this whole movie business. You know what I mean? I can even remember. Actually, this is shortly after I started working in the games industry. This is like 2007. I was at a church, and the pastor said that video games are evil at the church I was at.
Ah,
Um, so you can imagine, like, this idea is like not even really that old, right? I
mm,
mean,
mm.
whatever that is, 15 years ago now, but
Isn't that crazy?
it's not something that's too crazy. So yeah, so there's just not that many Christians making games as a result of a lot of this kind of, I guess, just attitude, right? And so but I've not been shy about it, saying, I'm a Christian. And of course, I named the company Eden Industries.
Yeah.
On our website, I talk about how the name was inspired by the biblical Garden of Eden. So I'm not shy about it. And so I remember this is just after we released our first game, I was contacted by a guy I got to know. He was one of the few Christian journalists covering games. So he would,
Wow.
cover it from that perspective. And he said, hey, a friend of mine he's writing an article for like a big, like one of the big game websites. He's writing an article on Christian game developers, and he wants to interview you. So this was like big because this is a big website. So I think he called it like the new wave of Christian developers, something like that. And so it was like me. I don't know if for anyone who knows games, you might know like Lance Preeb. He's like the creator of Club Penguin. For those, Club Penguin's pretty big. People might know that. A couple others, right? So that was a great time. I got to talk about not only um, my earnest faith, but also my earnestness at the craft. And I think that's important because people like that genuine, right? Like they don't like. There are some Christian games that they're really just the Bible wrapped up in a very like loose
Right.
game, right? And like people see
Right.
it's not authentic,
Right.
right? So they see through that. But someone like myself who's really trying to make something of a high caliber of
Mhm,
game, but also
mhm,
sort of express my faith.
mhm.
I think that resonated. And then one final thing, when we were making our second game, um, I got an interview with like a big website, and so I was prepping for it, and then it was gonna be a live interview. So there's gonna be people there, chat, the whole thing, right? So it was a live interview. And he said, hey, in the morning of, he said, hey, I found out you're a Christian because I guess he read that article that I just mentioned, and he said, can I ask you about your faith? So I said, yeah, sure. So during this live interview, we were talking about not only my game but my faith, and I could see in the chat people saying like, oh, you know, I'm a Christian. It's so cool that you're a Christian game developer. Like I didn't know there were any Christian game developers. So it really resonated with people as well. So yeah, I think being sort of a light to people in my
Mm.
industry is one big part of it, I think, and then also, of course, yeah, to the players as
That's
well.
fantastic. Ryan, you're saying so much in that just brief moment because you're talking a lot about what it looks like to develop something of excellence that brings glory to God. If you weren't good at making games, you wouldn't be the kind of guy that they wanted to interview. And then if you didn't have a
Hmm.
genuine faith, when they did want to interview about your faith, you wouldn't have anything to say. And so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's like that sort of that combination of being excellent in your faith, but then excellent in the real world that calls attention to your Father in heaven. Good for you, man.
Hmm.
That's fantastic. That's a great example of what we're trying to do. That's good. Well, let's talk a little bit about the business. We talked a little bit about what it looked like to really develop it from the beginning and how it was a struggle. And then you talked about the impact that it's making now. But why don't you talk more about when it clicked for you? There was a moment when you sort of settled in and you realized, go back to your old story, story at the beginning about when you had the CEO badge, when you realized I actually am a CEO and I kind of know what I'm talking about. Like, talk about when that clicked for you.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, um, let me also give you the first time I think it sort of clicked. But in the very, very early days, right? So, just that, I think that'll set up a bit of this story too. So, as I mentioned, I was working for another company, but wanted to make this game on my own. And so, um, I would sometimes, like, the company knew I was making it, so it wasn't like a
Mhm.
secret. I don't think they really loved that I was doing it on my own too, because I think maybe they saw the writing on the wall, like, oh, he might quit, kind of thing. But anyway, but so sometimes I would bring it into work and I would show my coworkers, and they would like gather around to play it, and like they were like, wow, this is really, really cool. And I was like, huh, okay, so they're kind of liking it. um and I had submitted it into like this game contest, whatever. And one of the judges, who actually, it's funny, I'm still in contact with him today. He wrote an article saying like, wow, this game is really special. And it
Mm,
was a very early kind of thing, but he
mm,
really saw the potential of it.
mm,
And I was like, "Well, okay,
mm,
interesting." And then, so, and then I think someone else later contacted me about the game, and they wanted to ask questions, and because they also wanted to ask questions about the fact that I was working on Luigi's Mansion at the
mm,
time, which I couldn't talk about, right? But I was starting to get this like press coverage.
mm,
And I was like, oh my goodness, like this might be a thing. So that was sort of when things were clicking of like, this actually could be a thing. Like I could actually quit my
mm,
job, right? So
mm,
that kind of clicked in that first moment. But I'll tell you, but recently I kind of clicked in a whole other moment. So I mentioned, yeah, after I had that CEO badge thing, I didn't tell people I was CEO anymore. So later, next time I went, I didn't put CEO on the badge. I put founder, and
oh,
that way at least it didn't sound,
mhm,
fancy. And I think even on LinkedIn, I think I had my title as like game
mm,
director. I didn't want to put
mm.
CEO, right? And where it clicked for me was I had to change my title back from game director to CEO because I had too many recruiters trying to hire me to be a game director. I was like, look, I'm not going to come work for your company. This is my own company, So I did change it back. So that was when it clicked. I was like, okay, now I've kind of like earned this
Ah,
title.
that's good. That's good. I'm
I
gonna
am
own
now a
this. Yeah,
CEO.
right.
Yeah.
I love
So
that. I
yeah.
love that. Well, good for you. Good for you. And I think that's a special moment when you know that you've come a fair distance and you recognize, okay, this was a struggle, but it's not going to be the same kind of struggle as it was before as I move into the future. So
Mm,
that's fantastic. Now, one of the things we're most proud about is the fact that you're regularly living your faith out. You do it in your church, you do it with your family, you do it in your business, and you're obviously still growing. And so there's all kinds of struggle ahead of you. And Branches is a 30-year organization, right? So we're sticking with you for the long term. So everybody here listening, and myself included, excited to see what's going to happen in the next 30 years. I mean, just pumped to see how this company is going to grow and how you're going to grow with it. But if you go back to when you originally decided to join the Branches Worldwide community, right? So entrepreneurs all over the world, all using their business to bless their community, all committing to this long-term vision of working together to really bless their communities. When you decided to join, what made you say yes? Because man, that's a big commitment, right? Like we found you and said, I think you'd be a good fit for this. Talk a little bit about that.
yeah. So I mean, it came at a really interesting time because we were just starting to like really explode as a company, and so um, things were becoming crazy and sort of overwhelming in a good way. I guess that cup started to overflow, and I'm
Mm,
like, I need like another bucket or something here, right? Um, and so I remember very vividly. I was talking with these like big publishers like Activision, for anyone who knows games, right? Actually, like one of the biggest publishers because we're helping them with a project and on Hogwarts Legacy,
mm,
which has come out and massive, massive game, and these huge opportunities, and we're able to do them. And I was like, it's very stressful and crazy in a very different way than I had for 10 years. Because for 10 years, it was just like, okay, I'm going to, just dive into the code and program and make the game do what I need. Now it's like, okay, you need to run this
mm,
operation with these big clients. They're
mm,
expecting you to like manage it all,
mm,
right? Like, and so and the thing that too, like a decade of hard work, and no success or limited success really smashed into my head was like humility to like don't pretend you know something when
that's
you
good.
don't, because you're going to run into failure. Like know what you can
Mm-hmm.
do and be honest and humble about it, or else you're going to crash and
Mm-hmm.
burn. And so when I was approached about Branches, I was in that spot where I not only was humble about what I knew and didn't know, but also had this kind of new crazy circumstance around my business that I knew I'm not like a business mastermind. Like I know how to make games, but I'm not, to navigate all this, I didn't really know. So I knew I needed something. I didn't know what that thing
Mm-hmm.
was yet, but I knew I needed something. And so, yeah, when the opportunity came for Branches, I got to learn more about it. I was like, I didn't really know exactly what it was, but I was like, it sounded like the kind of thing I needed. I needed people who knew who were not just Christian, that was very important, but knew business and could provide mentorship and kind of had been, walking the same types of roads of, not in video games, but just the same kind of ideas of entrepreneurship and business and combining with faith and those kind of struggles. So yeah, for me, it was like the kind of thing where, again, I didn't really know exactly what I was saying yes to, but I knew that I needed something. And so to just, to not kind of, walk out into the unknown a little bit would have been very foolish because, who knows, maybe it'll turn out very good. And I mean, so far it has, it's been fantastic to be part of Branches. And so, yeah, it was sort of a little bit of a step into the unknown, trusting that it was going to work out. But again, it was the kind of thing that I knew that I needed. So I was, very happy to say yes to it.
That's good. I love that you're saying that, because in the middle of the struggle, you recognize there's a lot that you don't know, and you recognize to have that attitude of humility is really the way forward. That's how you're going to learn more, how you're going to grow more. And so surrounding yourself with people who are in a level of expertise that's different than what you have, that's key. I love that attitude. Fantastic. Good. Well, Ryan, I tell you what, here's a couple things I really want to make sure that we all understand. One of the things is that, you're a special guy and you're doing things that a lot of people aren't doing, and you're doing it in an industry that a lot of people aren't doing it in. And so being able to just be so authentic with your faith, but also make excellent video games at the same time is something that is rare. And we're just thrilled by the work that you're doing, and we cannot wait to see what happens over the next 30 years. So thanks for being on the podcast. This has been fantastic. Tell a great story. And I love the fact that you're open and authentic with your faith. So thanks for being on.
My pleasure. It was great. Yeah, I could talk about it forever, I think. So it was a pleasure to chat.
Good. And for the rest of you, thank you for listening. It's been a great episode today. And if you haven't already, feel free to follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and make sure you check the notifications so you see when the latest episode comes up. And if you haven't already been to the Branches Worldwide website, go on and you'll see Ryan's profile there. You'll learn more about Eden Industries, and you'll learn more about the work that we're doing around the world with all of our entrepreneurs. God is doing big things through our organization, and we're excited to have you a part of it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next episode.